All right. So
Hey guys,
I'm looking for that.
if y'all can
record
hear me,
button.
just hit a 1 for me here.
All right. Go check your comments. No. Hey, can anybody hear True Crime Web?
Hello everybody. Y'all, can y'all hear me yet? Mic is muted on yours. So
Oh, yeah,
that's
it's gotta be
mhm.
yours.
Did you hit that YouTube? No, we're there.
Yeah,
Hey,
we're there, but I don't even I don't see a broadcast button or
it says in broadcast.
I don't see a record button. Hey, True Crime Web here. Is anybody out there?
I see Jill Moses says, hi Steve, you're welcome. And Frank Master says, do you have operators?
Moderators.
Moderators. What did I say?
Operators.
Operators. Okay. If you would hit a 1 in there, if y'all can you hear us yet?
Can you hear us? Let me ask.
Oh, it says, yeah, they see and hear us. So
Woo!
welcome to our first broadcast, guys. We try and figure out some of the bugs and stuff. This, of course, is tonight is going to be more of a test and see where all we're going to be going and how we're going to progress with this channel. Try to do some good for the web community and bring forth some justice for these young girls. We're going to go through the chat here in a few minutes and thank everybody for showing up. And let's see who all we got here right now. Let's see. We got Marv, Frank, Melissa, thank you, Kathy, Dee, Olivia. Who else we have here? We got Jill Moser. We most certainly thank all y'all for coming up in here tonight. As we progress with these things, it's going to probably take us several times before we can get to the level of what Marv and Frank and them have. They've been doing it for quite a while, and they'll be very instrumental in our development as we progress further with this great adventure that we've decided to enter on. And by the way, of course, this is my wife, Andrea. And I'm Steve, of course. This is the first time a lot of y'all got to see me. Marv and Frank and Randy and some of the other YouTubers, they've seen me, but this will be y'all's, of course, some of y'all's first times for me. But, and of course, as we go along in this, and if y'all have some questions and stuff, feel free to contact me, email me, put some questions in chat for me, and we'll try to be as smooth. And I'm going to try to give you a perspective of how law enforcement thinks, how we operate, and whenever we get called out to a crime, it can be anything from some minor situation to something as terrible as what happened in Delphi. As investigations and as families and all this stuff that is developed over the years in this 5 years, and it's becoming a cold case, we really don't want this case to ever reach a standstill. And it hasn't, due to people like Marv and Frank and the web community that are constantly putting this image and the information out there about Bridge Guy, Libby and Abby, keeping their name on the forefront. And but now we've got a few people here, and let's go and start talking about the introduction of how we would look at working a cold case, from starting with the victimology, and then on through the show, we're going to talk about some of the impacts that Libby and Abby has had and continues to have, and how it has affected families across the United States and has made them aware of certain situations, and that what these girls, what happened to these girls is absolutely a tragedy. But so much has come from that tragedy that will forever make our society a better society for the fact of what they've been able to bring and make the our families aware of what can go wrong in a 45-minute period. A lot of things went that those girls did that day, they did right. What the families did that day, they did right. But unfortunately, it still ended up in the results of with the results of two innocent girls losing their lives and a bridge guy being able to walk our streets for 5 years now. And so we most definitely want to be able to address that issue. But all right, so this is how we would talk about and how we'll advance our cases and the case in our search for a bridge guy. Whenever law enforcement, there's certain parts of a crime that law enforcement looks at. When they first get to a scene and everything, it may turn out, such as a case here with Libby and Abby, that was just simply on day one, on that February 13th, it was a missing person. And it was that way for almost 24 hours, simply a missing person. And then tragedy was found when they found the bodies. And from that moment on is a timeline that has started and continues to this day of what law enforcement has done, what Bridge Guy has done, how he has evaded capture, arrest, and justice. But whereas Libby and Abby no longer have a timeline from that, but they do have something that in law enforcement we look at as, and it's called victimology. It's whereas we look at a victim that once we're made aware of the situation, that we go in and do a study and we looked at that victim and we try to understand that the lives of these two innocent girls. And we look at the murders and see what information that we can find from their habits and their daily lives, their social media contacts and everything, from their families, from their friends, just everything that you can that you could possibly find out about a victim, and see at what point that they may have possibly, prior to their deaths, crossed paths with a person that ultimately killed them. And so that's just a very basic guideline of what victimology is. But and it's not easy with law enforcement for the fact that when you're first trying to find out this information, you're trying to get this information from a family that is emotionally challenged. Their mindset is not clear at that moment. So a lot of information is missed during those first initial hours. It's very important that we get critical information, but it's hard to get the right information and get a clear defining understanding of the situations. But once we do have a clear understanding, we can then start opening up searches and going along different avenues. Because as you build up the victimology, if you find that certain behavior occurred prior to their deaths, that what risks were involved with what contacts they had, such as the case with this one, of course, and Monday morning quarterbacking, you can look back and see that there was a social media presence and there was contact with the Anthony Shots account. But as we find out all this information about our victims, and which we'll go in and build a timeline of what led up prior to their contact with Bridge Guy. what information and what avenues and where does, how did they get in that situation? Whereas, was Bridge Guy targeting him, or was it just a chance encounter? It would be a far easier case to solve if there's some type of contact and their paths cross prior to the murder. If it's just a random killer passing through, this case is in may never be solved. But the greatest bet and the greatest hope for it to have some type of being able to solve this case is going to be through the victimology and seeing and making and finding out what persons within that community may or may not have targeted Libby and Abby, and what contact they had. Is it a local? Was the reason that the cause of their death something that was pre-planned? Was it something that happened and occurred on the day of? Did they see something? Was someone targeting them for a specific reason or for a comment made that day? And so there's a lot of information that happens. But okay, so now we understand a little bit about what victimology is.
You have a question.
Okay, what is that?
All right. Joe B, is there any chance BG tried to frame more than one person?
At this stage of the investigation, and they're having to go back now and look, if they don't have a person that is absolutely a person of interest and is a suspect, and seeing the information that they're releasing, and there's none that they've released in a couple, 3 years, that absolutely anything, if it's been throughout history that criminals always try to blame someone else. And if it's true what's said in the search warrant that we covered last night with Frank and Marv about that they're staging, the biggest reasons to stage is that you're trying to move the investigation away from you and towards someone else, and trying to pass the blame along. It's always been that way, and it may always be, and it always will be that way. But that's where law enforcement has to be open-minded enough and be running out each of the leads completely and covering all the bases and make sure that it doesn't evolve to the point that someone innocently is blamed and taken to court and found guilty. That happens. There've been people that lost their lives on death row due to being framed. So it's most certainly a possibility.
All right, you have two more.
Okay.
What do you feel about the MS releases?
Murder sheet releases. What happened with the first release when they was doing the Anthony Shots information release, that was pretty relevant. It was something that the family was surprised by. It's something that surprised a lot of people out there. That it was an area that the family originally had been told that no, it's not social media. But then when they released the Anthony Shots documents, it instantly became the headlines. Now that they've ran the course with that, and now we're at the search warrant that they've released that's 5 years old, I think it's just, I refer to it as it's clickbait to push their social media account of MS, the murder sheets. Ron Logan, there's some strange stuff that's stated in that search warrants, but we got to understand search warrants that whenever you read a search warrant, they're inherently created to be presented to a judge to make a person that whoever's property is about to be searched, that those search warrants, of course, will make the person that owns that property look guilty. That's the reason that gives you the right to go over there and search your properties with or without their consent. And to do that, you have to convince a judge that probably they are guilty of a crime. And unfortunately, sometimes law enforcement investigators, I've seen it, they oversell the search warrants. And then when the search warrants get out there, people look at them and they take them as gospel. But there's sometimes, like I said, I've had arguments with officers before that, really, all we need is probable cause. We're not trying to convict them right now. We go over there and we find the evidence, then we can convict them. But until then, so some of the MS stuff that they're breathing out right now, I don't put any weight to the 5-year-old stuff. Ron Logan, there were some strange statements. Now, do I think that he may have had knowledge? Absolutely. For the fact that until it's explained to me in some clear and understandable fashion, you don't wake up at 9:30 in the morning when there's 2 missing girls possibly on your property and make a phone call for an alibi. That is a strange, and it doesn't make sense. I know everybody says, well, he was drinking the day before and he didn't want to go to jail for drinking. That may be the case, but until I have something that guides me one way or another, I'm just cynical at heart, I guess. That I look to the worst side sometimes, and I might be wrong in that, and y'all may be absolutely correct.
Okay, Curly JK says, Steve, question, in my opinion, by the crime scene being staged, would you agree with me that if that's true, then it's more than likely someone that knows the victims, because there is no need to stage? He kind of added in. How do you feel about that?
Yes, that's the whole purpose of staging. Is that the reason that you stage is that without staging, when investigators get there and they do the victimology, they ID the victim, and they go to the family and they say, hey, who would do such a thing? Of course, the family is going to identify that, okay, it's him. He's the one that has a gripe with the family. He's the one that has had an issue with a certain individual. And more than likely, and that's the reason most staging occurs. If it's for the fact that the person that's doing the staging is trying to misdirect the case and the evidence to point towards someone else, to either blame them or to drive law enforcement away from suspecting them. So you're absolutely correct on that. But now there's also certain staging that can occur for psychological reasons of a psychopath that he's setting this situation up, that when law enforcement gets there, they see a scene that is shocking. He's sending a message. So there's different types of staging, and I don't know which way that when they use that word in the search warrant, in what direction were they pointing that the staging was? Was it for the psychological effect of the case, and it's something that this psychopath had to do to stage to satisfy his needs, or was it to drive it to another suspect?
All right. And Martin Frank asked the question that I did. How are they getting these documents since everything is supposed to be sealed?
I've been on this case now, I think about 7 weeks when I first started working with Marv and Frank. They know more about what efforts and what have been taken to obtain certain documentations. The Freedom of Information Act, of course, if you submit, and we won't know that no one else can get this information until we start finding people that said, hey, I tried to get that information, they wouldn't release it to me, but now they get it. How is that? And if that is the case, that is an absolutely great point. If other people can't readily go in there and ask for certain documents and not receive them, and there's someone else that can get them, then of course we have issues there. That's not right.
All right. Curly JK's got a good question. One more question. Is staging and signature the same thing?
No. Staging may be for certain satisfactions. Signatures are saying that, okay, guys, this is me. Just like you sign a check. Once you sign that check, that's your check. Or if you, if search and rescue teams, they have certain signatures and certain things that they'll do on a house at search versus a house that's been checked for certain, and if there's been recoveries made from there, there's certain things that happen in professional agents doing their jobs. Same with law enforcement. When we go in search buildings, there's certain things we do that allows you to know that we've been in certain areas. So that's a different type of signature, but it's all signatures that certain things have to, that for you to clarify that you are the one that done something, signatures are different than staging.
All right. So we're good there. You want to continue?
Okay. And there's some things that we have to recognize that most of the, and I haven't seen it referred to, but the impact that Libby and Abby has had on our lives, and that they haven't been recognized for, and they should be recognized for. What Libby and Abby did that day, and we'll never know the total number of lives that they saved. And they saved those lives by their acts that they did. By Libby taking the picture, and that picture being released through the investigation, and through social media, through all these creators out there. Y'all have instilled, while psychopaths don't react to fear the way normal people do, but through all those actions, from the time that Libby took that photograph to the time that y'all show these photographs every day, the lives that y'all have saved due to the fact that this psychopath every day has to think, uh-oh, how many people are looking at my picture today? He had to change his, if he was a young serial killer, or if he had been killing prior to and was going to continue to kill since then, Libby and Abby changed his plans. Y'all's continued exposure of this guy day in and day out has affected him for the last 5 years. He's had to change his MO if he still continued to do that. He had to change his appearance. He had to go somewhere else. He's no longer part of that community, or he has had to stop. And so for that, Libby and Abby should most certainly be recognized for that impact of what they've done. And what's that?
Outback.
Okay.
Murder Sheets claimed while they were investigating the Burger Chef murders, MS was building a map, and that how they came upon this info. Keegan Kline stated one thing he did a lot: made menus.
I know Keegan Kline had some type of IT business, whereas he was creating stuff for restaurants and stuff. And the Burger Chef murders, and MS was building them out, and that's how they came upon this. I don't know how MS originally came upon it. I know from I watched quite a few videos when it started coming out about the Keegan Kline information and what he did. And that's another thing that we must recognize that has come from this investigation, that what Libby and Abby did, and the while they made contacts with Anthony Schatz, it brought all the resources to the forefront, so that when they started doing the victimology on Libby and Abby, and they looked through their social media, and they found this fake account that was created by Keegan Klein of Anthony Shots, that it revealed and exposed this massive child pornography ring, these child molesters. And that investigation, that's something else that, in the legacy of Libby and Abby, the impact that they've had on that, of um, of all these children, that these people that at this point have been arrested, and the people that will be arrested in the future, that will have a great impact of children that no longer have to endure that violence and that abuse. And it will save a lot of children from ever being exposed to those criminals that are now serving time, that came out of this investigation of Libby and Abby. And that is another great impact that Libby and Abby has had on our society. And from that, you also have to look at, we have to recognize that Libby and Abby have become the poster child or poster children for catfishing. That how many parents have been able to take and say, got children or telling their young girls or young sons that this is what can happen, that people will lie to you and misguide you, because children at that age, you know, you can warn them and warn them and warn them, but that doesn't mean that it goes, you know, they don't take it to heart. But this does present the opportunity that gives the parents that, okay, you see what happened here, guys, you have to be extremely careful in your lives. And so we have to recognize them for that and forever. And as for reasons like that of why and reasons of them losing their lives, that we have to recognize that information and keep fighting for it, because they've given us a lot. And they should be rightly recognized for it. And they are in certain ways. You know, they created a park for them. I think there's food drives in their names. There's annual walks in their names. There's charity. And the families are working with groups and getting the story out there so that parents can work with their children. And so that's a great impact that we have to recognize them for. And I say that about always hoping there's signs of hope, and for today to be the day. Exactly right.
Justice for Abby and Libby. Amen to that.
When and going back to the psychopath a little bit, in our future shows as we progress along, we're going to be talking a lot about psychopaths. Let me tell you, they are a different animal. And like I said, their fear factors and how they operate. And the reason I talk about that bridge guy more than likely is a psychopath is that the numbers, statistically, psychopaths are far more likely to kill than just a normal, you know, people that have normal psychological behavior just don't kill two girls walking across the bridge for no reason. There has to be something wrong with their mental capacity. They have to have that they don't value anything but their own self. And so as this series goes along and we start opening the case in the next shows about the different aspects of this crime, and as we do go through the victimology and as we go through the profiles and we start going through the motives of possible motives of why these murders occurred, and go through the MO and the staging and different aspects of this crime in the coming days, hopefully it will jog someone's memory, and that, you know, what can we do to solve this case? And I remember something along that line. I'm hoping that we get to touch someone's life that knows something, and they'll be able to bring some closure to this case.
Joe B's got a good question. Any thought BG may have used a canoe or waterway to escape out of that area? Maybe Frank or somebody that's been up there can help us out with that one.
Well,
Do you
yeah.
know?
Well, it's been discussed, and absolutely. I mean, uh, if they were targeted, bridge guy had to, if this is a planned murder, and we'll go down that path for a moment or two. That yes, somewhere in their victimology that they made contact, and the murderer knew for a fact that on Monday at a certain time they had some type of pre-planned arrangement that we're going to try to get to that bridge at a certain time. If he most certainly planned, and he lived within a certain distance and parked at a certain distance, and anything's possible. Although there was no, who knows how he got there? Who knows how he left? There were sightings of a bridge guy, I think, by a 16-year-old, and so there's certain things that may have or could have happened, and his mode of transportation could be in several different ways. Of all the ways to escape, I would put a canoe down the list a little bit more. I would put most certainly people that live within walking distance as or the parking area. It'd be, of course, in the top three areas, the cemetery, and you just prioritize what is the most likely avenue of escape, and you work your way through that.
Okay, so Curly JK says that I noticed the two young girls in Iowa and Abby and Libby's case, the dates add up to the same number. The dates match up. If my math is right, the killer is going to strike again February 1, 2029.
Okay.
And Marvin Frank says, yes, we've discussed that.
Okay.
First I've heard of that. Okay.
There's some, your math and a lot of other people's math, not so much mine. I hadn't looked at that part of it. I had seen that, and where people went in and run the numbers and stuff. And all we can do is hopefully that's not the case. If someone is able to plan that far ahead, and but there's no way that you would be able to target him if he's working over a vast amount of area. So I don't know if they would ever be able to find or link up murderers over that time period.
Let's see. Vanessa Marie said, at Joe B, if the current was strong, like Frank Masters said, that would be a quick route.
Yes, like I said, it would be, but we have to pre-plan, and we got to get our canoe there, and we have to drop it off prior to, which doesn't mean he didn't. I don't know. We don't have the victimology that law enforcement has of these persons. I wish we did, so that we would know exactly where were the girls, not only the day of all morning, which we pretty well, I think it's been out there about exactly from the time they got up and had the banana pancakes, that day is understood. But we don't fully understand the days leading up to February the 13th. We don't understand the month leading up to February the 13th, because a true and accurate victimology is just not within minutes of the death or hours of the death. It's months of the death, because you don't know, and you can't really understand the daily life of a victim until you go in and look at them for the last 6 months and really understand where they're at and who has problems with them. Some people can carry a grudge for a long time, and some people can't. And so the longer back that you search, it widens the avenues that you can go down and search, but it's the least likely or less likely that persons from days gone by is the killer versus someone within a week or so. Most of the cases I work when there's deaths involved, it's from contacts that's made within 7 days. you know, that either they followed them home, they saw where they lived, and it drove these people for whatever reasons that we're going to target that victim.
Jim Cook says, Randy, Frank, and Marv, do you think it was a local person based on what you saw out there actually on the trails? You want to?
Well, I can't speak for Randy, Frank, and Marv, but most certainly they can answer in the chat about who they may think it is.
All right, you want to keep going?
Oh, yeah. And let's see. Okay, now that we've covered some of the victimology, we're going to talk a little bit about where we need to start with timelines. Of course, we know what the timelines of law enforcement was that day. When law enforcement on the 13th was made aware of the situation, they, of course, are just reacting to a missing person. They're not reacting to, you know, we can Monday morning quarterback them all day long about what should have, could have, would have, and could effects it would have had on the case. But at that time, the family didn't, you know, they were extremely worried, but they were more worried that did they fall off the bridge and injure themselves? You know, did they drown? Were they hurt somewhere? Or, you know, did they need help? And so law enforcement's response to that and the search parties that were coordinated, those are all normal responses at that time. And a lot of issues have been brought up about why wasn't an Amber Alert made and all this. Well, there's certain criteria that law enforcement has to be able to meet, and rightly so or not, that they create certain criteria for the Amber Alert to be used. And the reason they do that, all that criteria has to be met, is so that it doesn't get overused and law enforcement and other people just take it as it's not a real big deal. When law enforcement gets an Amber Alert, they pay special attention to it because they know it meets certain criteria. Now, that doesn't mean that local law enforcement shouldn't and won't. I had a sheriff that I worked for about 15 years of my career, that if there was certain criteria met that we didn't have the ability to do certain actions, we most certainly had a contact person that was in touch with that family 24/7. Even on drownings, if we had a missing person in the lake and we didn't know if they were drowned or not, as long as they was a member of the family on the shore of that lake, we had a dedicated officer that stayed with that family. And that's just the way that sheriff was. And he was a good man to work for. You know, federal guidelines are just that, guidelines. They don't rule the day that certain officers have, you know, they can make certain decisions of how they're going to react to certain crimes and situations. The sheriff calling in the dogs that for Libby and Abby, that was a great move, all the way up to the point that he counseled them. And like I said, it's been discussed before, and that he admitted to his error, and that that was a bad decision he made when he turned them dogs around, because that may have revealed and tracked that we secured the scenes, dogs are here, and let's see what the avenue of escape was. Was it down to the creek bank and possibly to a canoe? Was it to a certain home? Was it to a certain parking lot? Was it to a cemetery? Those answers may or may not. Just because dogs could have been used doesn't mean that those answers would have been. But we most certainly would be sitting here 5 years later questioning and blaming for the decisions made. Like I said, we discussed it before, and the sheriff, I think Frank mentioned that he regrets that to this day. And okay, but let's see, we got any other questions here?
Let's see here. D. Ashley, for a day or two, for the dogs.
Uh-huh.
At least I would agree on that one. Let's go back.
Okay. On timelines, once the law enforcement has arrived on the scene, and like I said, day one is done. When the bodies are found on day two, anytime that law enforcement's on the scene and they're made aware that bodies have been found, and they're found by searchers who are civilians that may or may have not made good decisions of what they did at the time. They may have made decisions that they thought were respectful. They may have contaminated the scene. They may have tried to check for life, which that happens all the time. The first human response is when you see someone lying on the ground is render aid. And even in that moment of when you're out there rendering aid, you have no ill intent to destroy evidence. But a lot of times that is exactly what happens. But once that's passed and once law enforcement gets there and those first responding officers arrive and they start locking the scene down and certain steps are called in to bring in additional resources, which we have to say that for what happened with Libby and Abby on that first hour, first day, that the response from the federal level is something that I have never witnessed until I became aware of this case. During the news briefing, the FBI quoted how many numbers of FBI agents were made available. I think there was also marshal services and other federal agencies that came in to help, plus the local agencies and departments doing everything they could to help. That the manpower and resources that they brought forth to that day most certainly gave the impression to anyone looking at the case that this is something that can be solved quickly. And if you look at the interview by the DA, you will see that, they thought that the case would be solved in a couple of days. And unfortunately, that is not the case, and turned into 2 or 3 weeks and turned into 2 or 3 months. And now we're 5 years. But when the resources were there and everybody was looking for a quick solve and they had the pictures and they had the audio, who wouldn't be able to look at that information and say, hey, we're going to solve this tomorrow? If I was there, I would have probably had the same instincts that there's no way in the world that we're not going to be putting handcuffs on somebody in the next day or two. But that's not the case. And for whatever reasons, we don't know.
All right. Polygraph says, check out the Michael Monkey Vaughn case in Idaho. The governor of Idaho made a new alert system for kids that don't meet the Amber Alert criteria.
And that's what I'm saying. Just because the federal says that this is the way you should handle it, other local agencies can always choose to ignore it and create their own local stuff. The governor did here. Kudos to him. Because, like I said, sometimes things should, in Monday morning quarterbacking, of course, we always correct that, hey, that this is what you should have done. But a lot of times it's, it's too late. And once it's done, it's done. But once the resources are brought to bear on the crime scene, and during those first initial hours, as an investigator, when you walk up on a crime scene that's been secured by your officers and you're getting your initial briefing from that officer and you say, what have we got? Meaning, when you got here, what did you see? What has happened? Who's been to the bodies? What's been moved? Do we have a secured area? How far back did we secure it? Do we have a secondary secured area so that we can keep people not just 20 feet from it, not 200 feet from it, but can we keep people 200 yards from it? And so that you can have these outer bands, whereas you can move and you can find a path to a crime scene that doesn't contaminate. And that once you create that path, all persons traveling to a crime scene and away from a crime scene has to walk that path. And they have to come through checkpoints. I don't know if that was the case on this one. Don't know how many personnel was there. Don't know how they set it up, but that is the ideal situation of how you would set it up. You'd have your checkpoints, your entry points. You'd have your log of officers and your resources that were showing up at the crime scene and what their purpose is being there. There, in a lot of cases over the years, you'd come into a crime scene that was mishandled from the get-go, and you just stare in amazement, and you're wondering, where is the popcorn being sold at? Because it's just a cluster of where officers, they're just milling about looking at stuff. They have no regard for any of the evidence value that's there. They just want to see a body or something. And unfortunately, it's disgusting when that happens. And I got to see the end of that prior to when in the 90s, when we first started becoming certified as crime scene techs. A lot of crime scenes were just open fairs. It was just everybody and anybody wanted to come see, and it was a shame. But once it started being handled in a more professional manner, it upped the odds of crimes being solved, because you had certain standards that when you work a crime scene, that certain processes were engaged and committed to. I don't know what the case in Delphi was, but hopefully with the professionals of the FBI showing up, that they set everything in motion. Don't know how much evidence would have been lost by that time, because I know that the DA there said that they had never seen a crime scene of this magnitude, that they're used to dealing with different types of deaths, but that this one stood out, and that was most worthy of certain photographs. And sadly, departments, it's all based upon training of how crime scenes are processed. And it's easy to sit here 5 years later and Monday morning quarterback what happened there. And should we? Absolutely. For the fact that we have to try to figure out what went wrong, and so that other agencies become and realize they're going to do case analysis of this. Back in the days when we first started, we were looking at the Bundy cases. We were looking at the Green River cases. Washington State, they utilize some of the Boy Scouts or their youth groups to go out, and they were some of the greatest searchers in the country at that time because of the operation of the serial killers that was working in that part of the country. And a lot was learned from them and has been used over the years since then. Hopefully, what we got?
Vanessa says, at Steve, why would they have had the CSIs stay away from each other and not to speak to each other? I heard this somewhere and cannot remember where.
If CSI, and I don't quite understand, I'd like to have a little bit more information of that. If you could get some of that information, if you could find that, I most certainly would love to read that in the proper context, because a CSI team works as a team. Separating members, I don't understand what. If they're assigned certain tasks, because we really don't know the crime scene. Crime scene is more. In this case, we had 2 victims. The crime scene is more than just the 2 victims in a 5-foot area or 20-foot area. It's, a crime scene can be over a vast expanse. We have an abduction point that's several hundred yards from where the murder scene was. It wasn't known at the time. The only thing that was known at the time, of course, was the picture that was made by Libby and was uploaded at 2:07 that was on the social media that was out there, that, okay, the girls are on the bridge. And then 24 hours later, we find them, or 22 hours later, we find their bodies several hundred feet away. some of the CSIs at that time may have started extending that. Okay, this is where the bodies are. What is the path of, and there may have been indications at the crime scene on that embankment that led the search teams down there into the creek. You know, they could have been, leaves, marks, climbing marks, maybe where they fell or whatever as they was being chased or being pushed up the bank. There's a lot of clues that can happen at a crime scene. And so a crime scene can expand at any moment when people find a new detail, and then you start backtracking that, okay, we found these two innocent children at this location 50 feet from the creek bank, and everybody that you limit certain individuals that, okay, this is the path that you take to the creek, and you see if you see anything there. Mark your path. And so that when you come back, you come that same path. And so that you minimize the interference in the crime scene. And then whoever was on the creek bank that may have found that, oh yes, we have indications of someone coming up this bank. At that point, we send someone across the creek, or you contact someone to come in from a new direction, minding their P's and Q's and marking their route into the creek bank, and see if you can find an entry point from the other side or what you can discover on the other side, which I think there's some possibilities that some evidence was recovered from the other side of the creek, indicating that there may have been some type, we know now on Monday night that quarterbacking, or Monday morning quarterbacking, that we know where that abduction point was. We know what most likely was the natural travel route, and it matches up with what is supposedly where a phone and a shoe was recovered. But they wouldn't have known that day of. They would have had to do some backtracking, and until some of that information was, what you got?
Marv and Frank said, Steve, is it normal when searching to let citizens go on their own and not with an official?
If you're searching just for missing persons, certain agencies, you check in, you're not going to control everybody. Not everybody's going to log in. Some people will get on the phone and say, hey, I'm down here so-and-so searching for so-and-so. Meet me at whatever location, and they'll park in a driveway and join in with the search. It's extremely hard to regulate searches of children. People will show up, they'll start driving the roads, they may see movement in the woods, and they'll get out and just start tromping through the woods. And it's extremely hard to control. I don't know what all the cases were there, and how much time. I know the family made a lot of calls to a lot of family, and a lot of family showed up, as rightly so, as you would expect. And a lot of the community showed up, rightly so, as you would expect. It's controlled chaos when you were looking for children. I mean, things go bad. I mean, I've seen people get bit by dogs that's looking in people's yards for people, and a dog come out and bite them on a search team. That and it's just like I said, it's just controlled chaos, and then it becomes controlled chaos once you find victims.
All right, Olivia too. I fear the crime scene being compromised.
Almost all crime scenes are compromised in some shape, form, or manner, either by poor management or decisions. All crime scenes, even by the best investigators and the best trained people out there, as you enter into a crime scene, you're taking, you can suit up, do the best you can, but you still have to walk that ground. And when there's a lot of debris on the ground and you can't see, and you're trying to find out exactly what information that we can get, so that, because we have teams waiting, it is a fine balance of techniques of investigations and trying to figure out what information, how quick can we find out information about our victims, what are we looking for, did the perpetrator leaves some evidence of who he is on the scene. Sometimes that happens. They may leave a gun. They may leave a knife. They may leave something that has their fingerprints or a shoe print. What information can we get that will lead us to a certain perpetrator? And so it's a tough business, is balancing how fast you walk into and work a crime scene to get that information out to your teams that's going to be out there doing that neighborhood canvas.
All right. Joe put out here, I've said there was 4 things that needed to be photographed at crime scenes.
Okay. There's
probably more than 4.
There's a minimum of 4.
From what I've seen him bring home, there's probably just a minimum of 4. There's been buckets.
Oh God, there's thousands at crime scenes. You continuously, every step that you take down a hall, you take every time you see blood spatter, you take a picture. You find a bloody leaf, you take a picture, you collect, because you don't know what evidence at that time. Back in the older days, we most certainly didn't have the tests that they can do now. We couldn't tell the difference between animal blood and human blood at that time. Now they've got certain tests that are more specific.
Curly JK, my condolences to you before I even read this. Seeing a dead body is never fun. I found my grandfather when I was 4. He has shot himself in the head with a .44 Magnum, but to this day, I believe he was murdered because I read the report I found. That's awful.
It is.
I cannot even imagine.
Yes. In my career, I drove up on 3 similar situations where people decided to take their lives. Although I don't know, I know you have doubts if that's what your grandfather did, and you have your reasons for those doubts. And most certainly, if you want to discuss them, feel free to contact me, and we'll get together and I'll discuss anything with you about that. Yes, all death investigations, just because you're a homicide investigator, you have to look at all deaths, even ones that are natural, because sometimes people can stage natural deaths, not natural deaths, but homicides that make them look like natural deaths. You can stage suicides to look like suicides that are not suicides, they're homicides. And sometimes you'll come across what looks like a homicide, and it's actually either an accidental death or something along that. But that is the hard part of determining that when you're out there working these cases, that not all the bodies and all the investigations I was involved in were homicides. Most of them were either natural or suicides, or people that, for whatever reason, decided that they were no longer relevant and decided to take their own lives, sadly.
All right. C. Benz, do you believe the bodies were moved?
I most certainly do now. Even that FBI agent is lying to everybody, including the judge, because she most certainly said the bodies were moved and staged. She doesn't say how far they was moved. The crime scene areas that law enforcement will have concentrated on in the first 72 hours would tell you how far the movement was, or how far they believe the movement was. You can look at the crime scene, and I don't know what they did. Excuse me. Frank and Marv and Randy may be able to tell you what areas were searched immediately within that first 3 days that would tell you if the crime scene was, if how far the body was moved, because they would only secure and search and process the area within the movement of the body. If it was within just that yellow tape, then of course that's as far as the bodies were moved for the staging event. If they expanded out 100 yards, then that we have to say the bodies more than likely was moved 100 yards. Don't know. Maybe Randy will be able to answer that in one of my upcoming shows, because most certainly we're going to be covering information such as that.
All right. And Vanessa Marie is working on the audio that she discussed later, and she's going to work it out with Mark, see if they can find that. And then Curly JK, you're right, Steve. For all we know, there could be multiple crime scenes out there that day. And that's true.
It is, absolutely.
All right. That worked out well. Let's see here.
Y'all notice I've got my wife helping me with this here Google machine.
Oh yeah, I'm just as good on the Google machine. Okay. Let's see here. Digital. Hey Andrea, thanks for sharing your hubby. You can have my hubby anytime you need him. How about that? All right. So let's see here. Where was the other one? Digital. I was just thinking. Don't most landfills have surveillance? Maybe that's why Ron didn't try to lie about that. If there was surveillance, wonder what he was wearing.
Great question.
Good point.
Good point. And I'm sure the FBI has that information. They will have known. And that would be some information at some point that if enough pressure is applied, why wouldn't they have included that in the search warrant, that we have images of him wearing clothes similar to Bridge Guy? That if that was the case, they most certainly will put that in the search warrant. Didn't see that in the search warrant, so that leads me to believe that he wasn't wearing clothes that day while he was at the dump. Doesn't mean he couldn't have changed, but while he was at the dump, he wasn't wearing clothes similar to what Bridge Guy was, or they would have included that in the search warrant.
And Randy, hey Randy, there was people in the middle of that night's search after 2 a.m.
Probably so. Like I said, you can't control what people are going to do, and they're going to move through. Families, different people react in different ways, and some people will never give up, and rightly so. I wouldn't. If it's my child, or if it's someone that's close to me, I'll go to the ends of the earth.
Olivia, too, you nailed it. Yes, controlled chaos.
It is, absolutely.
All right. And Outback question. If RL was guilty, why would they not have charged him?
The answer is within that question. They didn't have enough evidence to find him guilty. Like I said, search warrants are created to give the judge the impression that a perpetrator that you're about to search committed a crime, because they're trying to create probable cause. You have to have probable cause before you can go in and start seizing property and start taking property away from a person. The only way you can do that is through the courts with proper evidence. And whenever they create probable cause, which doesn't have to be that it's conviction, but it's just more than likely that they have knowledge and were involved in a crime.
This is a good one. Vanessa Marie at Steve. What's the oddest piece of evidence you have ever had?
I cannot tell you that in a family environment.
That's what I figured.
Yeah. Let me tell you, there's some people out there that have strange lives. And sometimes while they're in the doing certain things during their strange life, they accidentally kill themselves. And
we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, we'll have to go into an adult channel at some point and be able to discuss stuff like that.
All right. So Mary Ellen, I thought I heard that they cut some trees down at the crime scene. If this is true, why would they do this?
I know Randy knows more about the rumor mills there. There's no, I have no evidence or firsthand knowledge of what was cut and what. I know there's in the rumor mill there that one of the victims was partially covered with tree limbs. And there's certain types of tree limbs they said it was used. When you speculate, you can speculate for a lot of different reasons, and a lot of times you come to the wrong conclusion. So I really don't want to, if that's the case, there can be a lot of reasons, from a ritual to simply hiding the bodies or whatever. I don't know how well they were covered. Oh, yeah, that's on his grandfather. Yes.
No, well, this is a different one. Curly JK. What I found weird was he was right-handed, and the report said they found the gun by his left foot. That's what I thought was odd. What do you think, Steve?
We'll discuss that more, and actually, we will do a call-in discussion of where people can call in and discuss things that they found either odd about each of their families and stuff. Don't know what, just for your question there, we'll address it this way. I don't know the situation. Was he sitting in a chair or sitting at the edge of a bed? Was he in a barn? Was he in a vehicle? Don't know how he was holding, what part where the injury was occurred or anything. But those are things that we can discuss at some time whenever you wish to discuss them.
All right, you're official. Number one down.
Yeah. Well, went at over an hour, guys, and tonight was mostly an introductory of some of the things that we want to look at and why we want to look at it and what the impact that these two young innocent girls have on our communities and on our lives, because we are all interested and we're vested in that we find justice for these girls, and let's all remember that, and that they did a lot of good things and that have saved a lot of people's lives and children's lives and has an impact on a lot of people. And most certainly the greatest impact is felt by the families that lost those victims. And so we should always remember them. But we'll be getting with y'all next week, and we'll start getting into the fine details of certain avenues that law enforcement took on the 14th and from there on, and we'll start working this thing almost as a cold case. And I hope you guys bear with us as we start learning how to do this process and everything. We appreciate y'all being here tonight, and I look forward to y'all being here in the future. And I wish all y'all the best. And Miss Andrew, what do you got to say to them?
Thank you so much, and good night.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.